Today I'll be doing Oklahoma. Every year so far that Brent Venables has been head coach at Oklahoma, they've had a top 10 recruiting class, which has been 3 years. Good news is he's getting talent there. And more good news is their defense improved a lot. Last year from how it was in his first year there. Uh, mm, in his first year there, they allowed 29.8 points per game, and then that went down last year to 21.5 points per game. Uh, mm, First, I'll be going over the roster some, and then I'll go through the schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. Starting on the offensive side, uh, Jackson Arnold will be taking over as the starting quarterback for Dylan Gabriel, and I really don't see much of a chance of him being as good as Dylan Gabriel was last season in his first season as the starting quarterback there. Uh, I know he's a 5-star quarterback, and I do think that he'll at least be solid for them this year. Uh, and He got the start in the bowl game last year, and he had a lot of yards. He threw for 361 in that game, but his completion percentage wasn't very good in that game, only 57.8. And He turned the ball over 5 times in that game, 3 interceptions and 2 fumbles. I don't think that he'll be turning the ball over 5 times a game this season, but I think he'll probably have some turnovers, at least early on this season, being an inexperienced quarterback. And He can also run some too. He's not just a talented thrower. Uh, they are a little bit questionable at quarterback this year. If Jackson Arnold can be an elite quarterback like he's supposed to be, being a 5-star quarterback, I think Oklahoma could have a chance to get to the SEC championship this year. And even if not, though, I still think they can have a good team. Uh, and at wide receiver, they are loaded there, so that will help him out having a bunch of good wide receivers to throw the ball to. They do lose their best wide receiver from last season, Drake Stoops. He became an elite wide receiver last season, and Oklahoma has had an elite wide receiver on their team for the last so many years. You can just go down the list of great receivers they've had: Sterling Shepard, D.D. Westbrook, Hollywood Brown, C.D. Lamb, Marvin Mims, and even Drake Stoops last season. I would expect uh, one of these wide receivers that they've got to become that top wide receiver for them this season and be elite. Uh, they've got four good wide receivers on their roster. Nick Anderson, as a freshman last year, really came on. He started the last 6 games and had 798 yards on 38 catches and 10 touchdowns, and he averaged a really impressive 21 yards a catch. I think he'll have a really big year this season. And They get back Jalil Farouk, who was a starter all of last season and had 45 catches for 694 and 2 touchdowns, averaging 15.4 uh, yards per catch. And They get back Andrell Anthony, who uh, uh, got hurt in the Texas game last season, but in the first 6 games had 27 catches for 429 and a touchdown, averaging 15.9 a catch. That was a season-ending injury for him last season. Uh, and then they bring in a good wide receiver from Purdue, Deion Burks, who had there last year 47 catches for 629 and 7 touchdowns, averaging 13.4 a catch. And he really looked good in the spring game, having 174 yards on 5 catches and 2 touchdowns. So he might be that receiver to become their top one this year. Uh, and at running back, Gavin Sawchuk will be the starter this year, and I really like him. He's a very good running back. He really came on late last year. He had 744 on 120 carries, averaging 6.2 a carry. And the last 5 games, he had over 100 yards rushing in each game. And they still have Javante Barnes, who was supposed to be the starting running back last season but got hurt. He was the backup in 2022 to Eric Gray, who I'm sure you know was a really good running back. He had that year 519 on 116 carries and 5 touchdown runs, averaging 4.5 a carry, and he had 2 games of 100 plus yards that season. I would expect him to get quite a bit of playing time this year. Uh, and they also brought in a transfer running back from Tennessee Martin. His name is Sam Franklin. I know Tennessee Martin is a little team, but he did have there last year 1,378 yards, averaging 6.2 a carry and 11 touchdown runs. I would expect him to help them out this year at running back. So they're looking good at running back. But the other question about Oklahoma's team is the offensive line. They lose all 5 starters from last season, and they're going to be depending on young players and transfers this year on the offensive line. Uh, and I don't think the offensive line will be bad. It should be at least okay, but their offensive line last year was really good. I wouldn't expect it to be as good. Uh, and on the defensive side, I'm high on Oklahoma's defense this year. I think it could possibly be the best defense in the SEC, at least one of the best defenses in the SEC. And their defense isn't just about the starters. The starters are all good, but this is a very deep defense this year. Uh, so on the defensive line, they returned Ethan Downs, who is a 2 year starter for them and has in those 2 years combined 67 tackles, 9 sacks, and 3 pass breakups, and 25 total pressures, and also a fumble recovery and interception. And they bring in a really good defensive lineman from TCU, Dominic Williams, who will be a immediate starter this season. He had last year there 33 tackles, 19 total pressures, and 3 sacks. And they have Trace Ford coming back, who uh, was a 4 star recruit coming out of high school. And he wasn't a starter last year, but did have 13 pressures and 3 pass breakups and 18 tackles and an interception. He played in every game last year, and I think he'll be a starter this year. And he was a transfer from Oklahoma State. He transferred to Oklahoma from there last season, and he was a star on Oklahoma State's defense before coming to Oklahoma. Uh, and they've got back Date John Perry, who was a uh, player for Tennessee before coming to Oklahoma. He came to Oklahoma last season. He made 4 starts and played in every game last year. And he's a 320 pounder and Lindy Sports magazine called him a rock in the middle of the defensive line. Uh, and he had last year uh, 18 tackles and a sack. Uh, he'll probably uh, do more for them this year. And they've got a 5-star defensive lineman, PJ Adebawor, who played a little bit last year as a true freshman, but didn't make any starts. And I'd expect him to get more playing time this year, even if he's not a starter. And they've also got a 5-star defensive lineman coming in this year, uh, David Stone, who will, of course, be a true freshman, so he probably won't be a starter this year. But I saw that he might get immediate playing time this year. Uh, so the defensive line is very deep and looks very good, and they've got some other players too that could help them out on the defensive line. And at linebacker, they're loaded. I think this is the strength. Well, the biggest strength of Oklahoma's team this year, and I think Oklahoma has the best linebacker unit in the country, led by Danny Stutzman, who in 25 games that has 228 tackles, 37 total pressures, 6 sacks, and 8 pass breakups and 3 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles and a fumble recovery. A lot of numbers. He'll be a first-round pick next year. Uh, and then they've also got Jaron Kainick coming back, who had 62 tackles, 7 total pressures, and 2 sacks, and 2 pass breakups, and a forced fumble last year. And they've got Kip Lewis, who didn't become a starter until the last 5 games of last season, but really came on last season. He had 66 tackles and a sack and a forced fumble. I think he'll be a really good player this year for them at linebacker. And they've also got Deshaun McCulley coming back, who in 22 college games has made 11 starts and has 78 tackles, 4 sacks, 6 pass breakups, and 25 total pressures. He was a 4-star recruit, and he started his college career at Indiana and transferred to Oklahoma last season. And then at cornerback, they're looking really good there. They returned one of the best cornerbacks in the country, Woody Washington, who in 2 years as a starter has 115 total tackles and 13 pass breakups. And then they get back Gentry Williams, who was a starter for the first 10 games last season, but got hurt and missed the rest of the year. He had 30 tackles, 3 interceptions, and a fumble recovery in that time, and he's a 4-star corner. And they also have Kendall Dolby, who made 3 starts last year, but played in every game and had 49 tackles and 4 pass breakups and 2 sacks and 2 interceptions. And they're loaded at safety also. They return a top 5 safety in the country, Billy Bowman, who has in 2 years, 24 games, 124 tackles, 9 interceptions, 9 pass breakups, and he had 3 pick sixes last season. Uh, and they've also got Peyton Bowen, who is a 5-star safety who came on last year as a freshman. Only started 2 games, but had 36 tackles and 5 pass breakups and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. And they've also got a 4-star Robert Spears Jennings, who played in 12 games and made 2 starts last year and had 38 tackles. So this secondary is deep, and very talented. This will be, I think, an elite secondary this year, and an elite overall defense this year. And then on special teams, they get both specialists back, but their kicker did really struggle some last year with field goals. That does need to get better. And Jalil Farouk will be doing all of the returns, both kick returns and punt returns this season. And he is a very good return specialist. He's very fast, so that's good. Uh, so moving on to the predictions, they start the season against Temple on Friday, which will be a very easy win. Mm, And then they play Houston after that, a team that's pretty new still to the Power Four and is just not very good. I think Oklahoma beats them easily. Mm, I think it'll be a blowout. And then they play Tulane next. Tulane, of course, these past 2 years wouldn't have been a given win at all for Oklahoma, but this year they lose their coach and their quarterback, so I don't think they'll be as good, and I think Oklahoma takes care of them pretty easily. So this is a nice first 3 games for Oklahoma to have because they have a new quarterback and a new offensive line completely. So that'll give them time to improve if they're bad at the beginning because they're not going to lose any of these, I don't think, no matter how bad the offensive line and quarterback are at the beginning. And then it comes time for their first SEC game, Tennessee at home. So Tennessee, I think it won't have as good of a defense as Oklahoma will. And their quarterback is also a 5 star and a new one too. And I know Tennessee won their bowl game last year, but they were playing Iowa, who couldn't get a first down, so really didn't mean that much to me. And the quarterback in that game is getting, uh, well, he's getting so much hype because he scored 4 touchdowns in that game. But if you take a look at his numbers in that bowl game, they weren't even very good. So I think Tennessee is questionable just as much as Oklahoma is at the quarterback position. And Tennessee is good at wide receiver, but I think Oklahoma is better. And I think Oklahoma's got a better running back unit. Now, Tennessee, I think, is stronger on the offensive line, but overall, Oklahoma to me is the better team. And playing at home, I think they'll get the win in a close one. Uh, Probably by like no more than a touchdown. And then they play their first SEC road game, and they didn't get it good with that on the road at Auburn. Of course, I'm sure you know how tough of a place to play Auburn is. Now, Auburn is going to be good at running the football again, and their defense, though, I don't think will be as good as Oklahoma's, and uh, mm, they're going to be better, I think, at wide receiver this year, but not as good as Oklahoma is going to be. And Auburn's quarterback is one of the worst in the country. And I think for Hugh Freeze to be able to have success at Auburn, he's going to have a good quarterback. So I think Oklahoma survives a close one in this one. Mm, and then they play Texas in the Red River rivalry. So I think this will be a really close game, and I think Oklahoma's defense is at least as good as Texas is, and Texas though is much stronger on the offensive line, and they're better at quarterback, and wide receiver is pretty even. And running back. Uh, mm, so I think Texas is the better team. So I am going to pick Texas in this game. Uh, but it wouldn't shock me if Oklahoma won this game. It's really because of Dylan Gabriel leaving, because it wasn't just Oklahoma's defense that won them that game. Gabriel had a huge game in that game. I'm just not confident that Jackson Arnold is going to be able to do that this year against Texas. And then they play South Carolina. So South Carolina is even more questionable at quarterback and offensive line than Oklahoma is, and their defense is nowhere near as good as Oklahoma's or at wide receiver, and I don't think they're as good at running back either as Oklahoma. Oklahoma's just a much better team, and playing at home, there's really no reason to expect this one to be close. I think Oklahoma wins by at least 2 touchdowns. And then they play Ole Miss on the road. I think it'll be close. I think their defenses match up pretty evenly. But I think Ole Miss has a better quarterback and offensive line, and wide receivers pretty even. And Ole Miss, though, I do think is a little bit better at running back also. So I think Ole Miss wins was they just have more offense. And then they play Maine, which of course will be a very easy win. They'll destroy them by like 50 points. It's pretty much like a bye week. And then they play on the road at Missouri. So Missouri is not really a tough place to play. It's a place where you would think that if Oklahoma is actually the better team than Missouri, that they could get the win even on the road. Oklahoma has a much better defense, I think, than Missouri does, and Missouri does have a experienced quarterback who actually got good last year, and Missouri it looks better on the offensive line. But I've heard that Missouri is loaded at wide receiver, but I think Oklahoma is even more loaded there, and I think Oklahoma is a little bit better at running back. So I think Oklahoma gets a really close win over Missouri. And then they take a week off before a big game at home against Alabama. So Oklahoma, I actually think, probably has a better overall defense than Alabama does. I do think Alabama's better at the line of scrimmage than Oklahoma. And right now, I would have to say they have a better quarterback. Because from what I've seen of Jalen Milroe and Jackson Arnold, Milroe has looked better. And Oklahoma, though, I think is quite a bit better at wide receiver, and running back is probably close to being even. Uh, and if this was at Alabama, I would take Alabama, but mm, it being at home, I think Oklahoma is good enough to get the win. And if they didn't have a week off in between Missouri and Alabama, I don't think they'd be able to beat Alabama. But I think that week off will help them. Uh, and then they play after that to end the season on the road at LSU. So Oklahoma, I think, has a better defense than LSU also. But LSU is much better at the offensive line. And Oklahoma, I think, is better at running back and at quarterback. Of course, LSU has a new one too, Nussmeyer, and he looked better in the bowl game than Jackson Arnold did. And if this was at Oklahoma, I would pick them, no doubt. But LSU is such a tough place to play that I think that will get to Oklahoma and they'll lose a really close one. So my final prediction for Oklahoma is 9-3 overall and 5-3 in the conference. I think it's possible they could do better than that and go to the college football playoff, but the, there are a couple of questions about the team, which is why I don't have them making it there this year. Uh, but if you're an Oklahoma fan, you should probably like that the questions are on the offensive side now and not the defensive side because it's shown in the past that you can win a championship with a elite defense and an average offense. But if you don't have a good defense, even if you have a really good offense, you can't really win a championship. But that will be it with this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe, and I'll be back very soon.